Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Out and Equal Organized Corporate Community Partnership webinar titled Disability Inclusion Advantage with Disability In, supported by the Boeing Company. My name is Ben Demers. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Senior Associate of Out and Equal University. I'll be your host for today's call. Today we'll be hearing from a fantastic organization called Disability In, which focuses on disability and inclusion within the workplace, kind of similar to Out and Equal's own focus on LGBTQ inclusion. As we continue to strive to make our work fundamentally intersectional, it's important that we understand the differing abilities of members of the LGBTQ community, as well as the work of disability advocates more generally. And these are questions that have been on Out and Equal's mind more and more in recent years, especially in relation to our numerous events. And so we're seeking to learn from organizations like Disability In on how we can improve moving forward. This session is the first of two disability-focused webinars supported by the partnership between Out and Equal and the Boeing Company, who also have an established partnership with Disability In. Today's session will focus primarily on the work of this organization, while that second session on March 28th will highlight internal initiatives at Boeing at the intersection of LGBTQ and disability inclusion. Before we get started, there are a few logistical items I want to review. This is a broadcast audio call being held from 12 to 1 Pacific Standard Time, meaning you should be able to hear the sound through your computer, and hopefully you are now. If you begin having issues with this during the call, please feel welcome to chat in or call in to the corresponding number. If you or a coworker is listening but unsure how to sign in, go to readytalk.com, click Join a Meeting, and use access code 6946521 to join. If you have any logistical questions during the call, please chat in and I'll respond as quickly as I can. We also ask that if you have any questions on the content discussed on today's call, you send these questions into our presenters to discuss during the Q&A period at the end of the session. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording and the slide deck will be shared with all who've registered after the call for you to watch again, or if you want to share it with anybody else within your network. I also want to mention some upcoming webinars and events at Out and Equal. So on Tuesday, March 19th, we'll be hosting our 2019 Summit Kickoff Call. So this is really to give you all the information that you'll need to know about this year's Workplace Summit, taking place from October 16th to 18th in Washington, D.C. If you're not familiar with Summit, it's our largest annual conference that gathers diversity and inclusion and HR professionals, ERG members, senior executives, and many more people to discuss LGBTQ workplace inclusion. And it's a really incredible event. So I encourage you to join the call and learn about all the new things that we have planned for you this year. On March 28th, we'll be hosting that second webinar that I mentioned in partnership with Boeing, titled The Intersection of LGBTA and Differing Ability, Supporting All of Us. Whereas today's session focuses more specifically on the work of Disability In, this second session will focus more directly on company engagement. On April 10th, we also have our next global webinar titled LGBTQ Workplace Inclusion Initiatives in East and Southeast Asia. So if those are two regions where your company operates, I definitely suggest you join the call to learn more about diversity and inclusion initiatives there. This is obviously a lot of webinars, so I just want to remind you that even if you can't make a call, all of this information is added to our webinar archives on our website, and they're also uploaded to our YouTube channel in case you have to miss the live conversation. So you can check those out afterwards. We're also very excited to be hosting our annual Out and Equal Executive Forum this year from April 16th to 18th in San Francisco. The forum brings together LGBTQ and ally professionals to engage in professional development and to also explore key trends in LGBTQ workplace inclusion. Those classes are almost full, so if you're interested, please head on over to our website to learn more. With that, I'm going to turn things over to today's presenters. We're joined today first by Kirsten McPherson, Senior Project Manager and ERG member at the Boeing Company, who will also be introducing us to today's topic, and to our second speaker from Disability In. Kirsten, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Welcome all. As Ben said, I work for the Boeing Company as a Senior Project Manager. I am currently working on a team of roughly 1,000 people that will shape the global supply chain of the future. I personally identify as a lesbian. I mentioned project manager. I also identify as a mom, diversely abled, a boomer, and a whole host of other attributes that have contributed to how I identify. The pronouns I use are she and her. I've been supporting Out and Equal for about 15 years, and today I have the honor of introducing Liz Taub from Disability In, a Boeing partner in placing the value of diversity and inclusion at the highest level. As a member of Disability In, Boeing, along with Disability In's nearly 100 other corporate partners, is connected to experts in disability inclusion to support Boeing's efforts to provide a work environment for all employees that is welcoming, respectful, and engaging with opportunities for personal and professional development. Liz Taub is the Executive Vice President of Programs at Disability In, overseeing partner relationships, helping all of us to identify opportunities for involvement and providing guidance on Disability In programs and initiatives. Liz, I want to thank you for being such a great resource to Boeing and other partners, and I want to open by asking what you would like us to know about Disability In and the relationship with Out and Equal.
Sure. Thank you, Kirsten, for your strong partnership. Boeing is a company that truly walks the walk when it comes to disability inclusion. And a special thank you to Michael Cox, who I know is very engaged in Out and Equal, who's been an incredible ally to the disability community. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Liz Taub, Executive Vice President of Programs. My pronouns are she and her. And thank you, Ben, and to all of our friends at Out and Equal and the LGBT community at large. In so many ways, you've paved the way for people with disabilities and have rolled up your sleeves to help. It's been incredibly touching to see the attitude, the pie is as big as we bake it, in action. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Becky Curran, who leads our efforts at the Disability Equality Index, and Mackenzie Ward, who is our Corporate Relations Coordinator. So let's get started. Today we'll talk a little bit about the opportunity, why Disability In exists, what we do. We'll highlight one of our strongest programs called the Disability Equality Index, and we'll also provide you with the business case for disability inclusion and go over some other resources that corporations use to help make themselves more inclusive. So I think part of the thing that's most important here is the labor participation rate. And if you see the graph, 29% of working age Americans with disabilities participate in the labor market versus 75% of those without a disability. So we're looking at 10.7 million people who want to work and are looking for work. If we hired these individuals, we would be creating a win-win-win situation, a win for the individual who wants to contribute to society and pay taxes, and a win for their families, but also a win for business and the GDP, which if we hired just 1% of these individuals, the GDP could get a boost of up to $25 billion. And so who are we and how can we help? How do we help solve this issue? So Disability In is a nonprofit that is at the intersection between business and the disability community. And we work with companies to ensure that they're becoming inclusive of people with disabilities across the business. And so each of our programs was developed in response to corporations saying, how do we do this and how do we do this better? And so if you look at the Disability Equality Index, the Disability Equality Index is an initiative that was built based on the question, we know we need to do something, we want to do something, we want to do this well. How do we do disability inclusion? Like, what does it mean? And so we turned to our friends in the LGBT community and modeled the Disability Equality Index after the Corporate Equality Index. And we really took a look at how we can affect change across the enterprise. And so to develop these questions, we assembled a group of leaders from the disability community and companies that are leading the way for disability inclusion with representatives who sit in different areas of the business to make sure that the questions that we're asking can be asked and should be asked, but also bringing in different pieces of the community. 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. And so in the U.S., the definition is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And so I think that typically when you say the word disability to someone, they think of a white man in a wheelchair. And that is really not the picture of disability. 75% of disabilities are not obvious or not apparent. And so depression is the #1 cause of disability at work. Diabetes, cancer survivor, all of these different things are you're considered a person with a disability under U.S. law. And so how can we affect change for the blind community, the deaf community, the autistic community in one place? And so we developed this tool intentionally that the questions are out there in the public sphere, so that even if you cannot, your company doesn't want to take it, or you're just at the beginning, we want you to look at the questions to develop your strategy. And so if you take these questions, you can really get a good sense of what disability inclusion looks like across the enterprise, and develop a roadmap to help. And I know that Boeing has been an incredible partner in this effort and recently scored 100 on the Disability Equality Index. So we're really proud of Boeing. Boeing's also an example of a company who really used the Disability Equality Index to develop their strategy. And so, again, transparency is a major value. The questions are out there in the public sphere. This is not a gotcha tool. This is meant to help. And we don't publish scores unless they're 80 or above. So again, just trying to make this as low risk for business as possible. We're really lucky that Senator Ted Kennedy Jr. has taken the Disability Equality Index under his wing. And the Kennedy family, as many of us know, have a long-standing history of supporting people with disabilities. For Ted specifically, he lost his leg to cancer as a child and has a prosthetic limb. So this is personal for him. And I remember sitting in a strategy meeting with him, and we're figuring out, how are we going to grow the Disability Equality Index? And, Ted said, you need data. You need the equivalent of the McKinsey study on women for disability. Any research the disability community has is scattered. It doesn't really get to the underlying, does this help my business? And so we went to our friends at Accenture, and we asked them if they would help us see if companies that include people with disabilities perform better financially. And so Accenture took a deep dive into this question. And what they found was certainly a correlation between companies that score well on the Disability Equality Index and total shareholder return. That was an incredible finding. But what was even more interesting, they found that companies that started to take the DEI and increased their scores throughout the years, their financials went up along with scoring well on the Disability Equality Index, which was just incredible for us to see. And to read the full report, I did put the link into the presentation, and happy to send a copy to anyone who wants it. It's just been, the report was more successful than any of us thought it would, and so would be, and exceeded all of our wildest dreams. Because of this report, we knew we wanted to make noise, but we knew we wanted to make noise with the corporate community. And so when we released the study, we did not release it on Capitol Hill. Instead, we released it at the New York Stock Exchange. And we had Comptroller DiNapoli and Comptroller Stringer, the comptrollers of New York City and the comptrollers of New York State, which is the third largest pension fund. So these individuals are control billions of dollars and invest in companies like Boeing, like Accenture, and like the companies that everyone on this line works for. And they came and said, we always knew disability inclusion was good for business, but now we've got the proof in the pudding. And so they, in turn, sent letters to their constituents saying, we want you to take this thing. This is important. We're going to be asking about this the same way we ask about going green. And so that was a really important moment in our history that wasn't too long ago, where we aimed to get to the C-suite and we got above the C-suite. We got to the investors in the C-suite, which was just absolutely amazing. Again, I highly recommend going over the full report. We've also come in and done the full, given the presentation in person in case anybody would like to have that done. And so moving along, I want to talk about other ways that our organization has worked with corporations and responded to the need. So again, one way was, here's the Disability Equality Index. Use this to help you build a holistic roadmap. Another way that we help companies is that we connect them with NEXTGEN leaders. And NEXTGEN leaders are college students with disabilities in the STEM, finance, and business fields. These students are incredible. I find myself every year saying, will you be my mentor? So we started with a 6-month mentoring program where we match corporate partners with these students, and we take them through a 6-month mentoring program that focuses on things that are important to business now. For example, self-identification. These students end up working for our corporate partners. How are we educating them around self-disclosure? What's in it for them? What might they be aware of? And we're also educating the business alongside that. So again, because 75% of disabilities are not obvious or not visible, it's really important that we're educating both sides on how to make this work. So we're educating corporations on who are people with disabilities most likely to disclose to. When, when can we expect this to happen? What are the processes in place that we need to have? And so because of the success of the mentoring program, where we saw that 65% of individuals who went through the program were employed, companies said, where can we go for talent? We get it, we're in, where can we go and find talent with disabilities? We go to Grace Hopper, we go to National Black MBA, we go to NSBE, we're coming to you for best practices in programming anyway. Help us. And so we began flying these students out to the annual conference that we have every year, and that this year it is, and I'll have this on a slide later on, that it's July 15th through 18th at the Chicago Marriott Downtown Magnificent Mile. And we started flying these students in 3 years ago. We flew a few students out, and one company came with recruiters. One company came with recruiters, and they made 9 job offers. And then the next year, more companies came with recruiters. And it got to the point over these past 3 years, which is a relatively small amount of time, where companies are going into bidding wars over these students. And so Boeing is an example of a company that, has sent recruiters on site and made job offers to some of our students. And so we're really proud of this. I mean, who would have thought that companies would be fighting over hiring people with disabilities? It's been an absolutely incredible thing for us to see. Moving on, another program that we run that helps companies become more inclusive is our supplier diversity program. And so we house the third-party certification for disability-owned business enterprises and service-disabled veteran-owned enterprises. This certification was developed in response years ago to IBM and Walmart, who came to us and said, we're ready to do, we're being approached by people with disabilities who say they own their own businesses. And we don't want to be vetting them, but we want to know where our money's going. And so you're going to vet them. You're going to be that third-party certification, similar to NGLCC or WeBank. And so we partnered again with the LGBT community to develop this certification. And what's been really amazing to see, not only are suppliers growing and them growing in terms of contracts, but also, a major step for us was that our certification is now included in the $1 Billion Roundtable. I did not know what the $1 Billion Roundtable was before I got here, but it is the who's who in terms of supplier diversity. And so they recognize entities that have spent $1 billion or more every year on diverse-owned businesses. And now when companies spend with disability-owned businesses and actually LGBT-owned businesses, because we were both accepted at the same time, that spend counts toward that $1 billion, which is something that's very helpful for business, but also really helpful for us to be recognized as part of the diversity club, if you will. We also run programs year-round on seeking to engage corporations and help learning happen throughout the year, not just at the annual conference. And so some ways that companies engage with us year-round, one is on the ERG-BRG Leadership Committee, where we bring together chairs or co-chairs of the disability ERGs from various partner companies who come together to learn from each other. Everything from a company who's had one for 30 plus years to a company thinking about starting one. It's really important that in this space and in any space, no one's starting from ground zero. And so how do you develop a disability ERG, sustain it, grow it, make sure it's actually affecting the business? These are the types of conversations and toolkits that are developed from the ERG-BRG Leadership Committee. The Global Roundtable, that is an interactive forum for business leaders to engage with their peers across industries on disability inclusion. And one of the most challenging aspects of global disability inclusion is that the definition of disability varies in every country, as do the cultural norms. And so one of the things that the Global Roundtable has released, and this is open to anyone, and I hope that you'll take a look at it, we released profiles on 27 different countries on the definition of disability, the legal requirements, accessibility requirements, cultural norms, to help companies get a good sense when they're looking to strengthen or create programs inside these countries. And our partners are populating the tool with best practices in country. The Procurement Council. So the Procurement Council is a network of supplier diversity professionals that come together to learn from each other and advance the work that the organization is doing, advance disability inclusion in the place where you spend your money, because not every person with a disability wants to work for corporate America, and where you spend your money is another really important part of inclusion. We hope that you'll join us at our annual conference this year, July 15th through 18th in Chicago. It's a lived experience. Nothing I can say can quite describe it. And really want to say I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. I love having the interaction more so than talking at you. And so here's my contact information up on the slide, Liz at disabilityin.org. Happy to connect with anyone. And then, want to leave time for questions, make sure that folks are asking. No question is non-intelligent, and no question shouldn't be asked. Now is a great time to learn.
Perfect. Thank you, Liz. So we are getting a lot of questions in, and I encourage people to keep sending in questions. We really wanted to take time today to have more of a discussion and really be able to field any of the questions that we're getting. One of the first that we have here is, have you seen companies engage in unique ways at the intersections of disability and LGBTQ inclusion?
Great. So this is Liz, and my disability in colleagues, please feel free to add on. So it's a good question, and I think that one of the most common themes between the two, one, you could be LGBT or a person with a disability, and you can be any age, gender, ethnicity, religion. And so another major commonality is the self-identification piece. So it's not something that you can always see. And so I think that when the ERGs from the LGBT community and the disability community get together, and we've seen this with companies, to talk about the things that you can't see but are still, of course, very much there, that's a really strong way to bring diversity forward for both ERGs.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question here that's asking, how is it that you advise to support those with mental disabilities like people with PTSD, which is, I think, a question that people think a lot about around disability inclusion and what that looks like in this particular instance.
Great question. So I think for starters, you always want to look at your benefits package and your accommodations process. And one of the things that we have found really as a trend is that companies that the best thing you can do with accommodations is to have a centralized fund for this. And it makes sense. If you have PTSD and you want noise cancellation headphones at work, it shouldn't be up to you to go to your manager and then up to your manager to take that money out of his or her budget. And so what we really recommend companies do is create a centralized fund so that when they request accommodations, the money to pay for those accommodations actually comes out of that fund. This just helps eliminate the power struggle and the reality that people with disabilities don't want to ask for help. Another thing that is important is some companies actually have this process in place within the company. They have this centralized accommodations process, but no one knows about it. And it's not easy to find. And so that also creates hassle where there shouldn't need to be much of a hassle. And so I would say that a good place to look, and for more specifics, again, really recommend looking at the Disability Equality Index, looking at your benefits plan, and looking at the accommodations that are available. I'll say, one other thing. It's not surprising, but when you think about, if you go to your HR benefits team and you say, what is the number one medication that our employees are on? And I've never had a company give me a different answer. It's Prozac. And so this is something, this mental health component, and the component of things that you can't necessarily see is only getting more and more important and more significant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something we're definitely going to see kind of addressed more in diversity and inclusion in coming years, especially as you see more millennials talking about it, more Gen Zers talking about it. Another kind of related question is, do you have any best practices to encourage more people to self-identify at work with a disability?
Great question. Such good questions today. Okay, so we definitely have a variety of kind of best practices in terms of self-identification, what has worked. Companies have to address disability inclusion holistically, and if you send out a periodic survey, you're not going to get the numbers that you want. And what we find is that culture eats strategy for work, right? And so there's a lot of work to be done here. Self-ID, that topic is only getting more and more important for the disability community, especially now that the leader of OFCCP, Craig Lean, he has children on the autism spectrum, and he has said this is the year of disability. We're not an organization that goes out there saying, you enforce those regulations. We want business to be recognized for the good work that they're doing and recognize that there are a lot of issues with voluntary self-identification. But that being said, there are definitely ways to help communicate when it comes to self-identification. So one is education around what a disability is, right? So there will be people who have disabilities that don't realize that they have disabilities or don't think that they qualify as a person with a disability. And so communicating those disabilities that are common, but that people don't necessarily think of the word disability because of the stigma associated with it, is really important. So that the communication on that, creating a memorable campaign with a catchy slogan. So we've seen companies who have people with disabilities, people from various parts of the company and people with various disabilities talk about what it's like and how they've contributed to the company. So you would have, let's say, someone who's out about mental health, someone who's a service-disabled veteran, someone who's deaf, someone who's blind, so that, it's not only in writing, but people are hearing the stories about disability. And a memorable campaign always helps. I know that one year ESPN did, hashtag count me in. And there are all kinds of different cute slogans that you can use, but I think that the more variety in a campaign around self-ID, the better the results will be. Communicating why the company is asking and assuring confidentiality, can't, stress that enough. Framing regulatory requirements in a way that employees realize there is a benefit to them and others. For example, self-identifying will help our company remain competitive for government contracts. It really helps ensure that employees with disabilities understand they're vital to the company's growth of members of the country's largest minority. Inclusion of people with disabilities is essential to the well-being of our company because it fosters creativity and innovation. and also being sure to communicate how the information will be used and how the information will be protected. Last thing I'll say on this topic, I think it's really important to provide training and resources to improve disability awareness. It's really important for talent acquisition teams who are responsible for identifying prospective employees, and for supervisors who will be working with more employees with disabilities, creating training and an open dialogue that permits leaders to safely ask questions. Most people don't speak up on this issue because they're scared they're going to say the wrong thing. And really helping existing staff feel more comfortable, that paves the way for success with disability inclusion.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of that answer definitely resonated with me, especially around how do you get, how do you let employees know why they're giving this information? That's something that I think people who work in LGBTQ diversity and inclusion, they face that a lot around self-ID of how do you convince an employee that they would want to give this information, to their employer? And so similar challenge faced there. And so maybe another place that people who are doing that work can kind of draw best practices from, their employees or their colleagues who are also doing this around disability and inclusion. We got another question here, and this is something I've been wondering about also since you mentioned it. Can you share some instances of the range of differences across countries in the definition of disability?
Sure, absolutely. So, in countries like Japan, you need a card that says that you have a disability. In a country like India, for example, we have, and I'll get to the definitions in a minute, but it's just interesting to hear the differences. Here, it's about self-identification, self-disclosure. There, it's like if you have a disability, you need a card that says you have a disability. In India, one of the companies that we work with said, we called the India office to ask them, what are you doing around mental health? And the office said, we don't have anyone with mental health problems. So it varies in terms of cultural norms and in terms of the definition in and of itself. Happy to go through a specific company definition. Also, again, recommend to anyone who's interested to go on our website, disabilityin.org, go under resources and the global toolkit, and you can find definitions of, in countries like Argentina, Brazil, China, Ecuador, Germany, Ireland, Japan, et cetera, so you can really get a good sense of not only the legal definition, but what cultural norms influence those definitions.
Yeah, definitely. We have a question here for companies starting out. Where do you start from what you presented, and how engaged are executives, or how engaged do you expect executives to be in this approach?
So I think that one of the things that makes ERG successful across any ERG is definitely the executive sponsor. Is the executive sponsor out and about on this issue? And one of the things that we've seen actually, many of the executive sponsors of disability ERGs tend to have a child with a disability. And I think that this holds true for the LGBT community as well. You really want your ERG itself to be led by people with disabilities. And so while parents are important, parents' goal for their children is not necessarily the same goal that the children have for themselves. And so we find that these executive sponsors are passionate about it, but they also realize that they don't really know what the right thing to say is, and they don't want to get in trouble. And so they're kind of quiet on the issue. They're not loud and proud. And so that's one of the things that we want to change in terms of executive sponsorship. We even at our conference pulled together executive sponsors from many of our corporate partners to do just a basic disability etiquette 101 session with them. and so that they can be in a room with their peers and say, really see, I'm not the only one here. I'm not the only one who doesn't know this stuff. And they felt safer asking questions once they kind of saw that most people are in the same space. So it's our job to educate the executive sponsors and not take up too much of their time, of course, which is definitely a big challenge. In terms of a place to start, I really do recommend looking at the Disability Equality Index. One of the benefits you have if you don't feel you've started yet is the ability to form a strategy that's actually holistic. And so certain things companies may be doing are sort of offensive to people with disabilities, unintentionally. And so, for example, one of the things that we recommend companies not do, we don't recommend you have a day where you put your executives in your C-suite and you blindfold them and you tie their arms behind their back and you tell them this is what it's like. That approach is very one-dimensional, and it also leaves the person feeling pity. And we don't want pity. We want paychecks. So that's something that has been, I've heard, been done in the past, and it is considered for the most part offensive. It's sort of like me saying, I'm in New York City. I want to know what it feels like to be African American. So I'll paint my face black, and I'm going to try to hail a cab, and let's see how that goes. And it's like, that's beyond one-dimensional, right? You're just seeing such a small part of this person's life, and again, it's paychecks, not pity.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question here from Jeffrey asking, how does one get involved with the mentoring program that you mentioned?
Sure. So, many of the companies on this line may be partners already with Disability:IN. It is a benefit of partnership. If you're curious if your company is a partner, or to learn more about any of the programs, feel free to email me, liz@disabilityinn.org, and also feel free to email with any questions that you may not feel comfortable asking, although I sure hope that we get as many questions as possible. But it is for corporate partners.
Great. I have another question here asking, are there any unique characteristics of LGBTQ people with disabilities that we should be aware of that you feel comfortable speaking to, Liz, either as a business leader, ERG leader, et cetera?
I'm not entirely sure that I can speak to that accurately. I will say that it goes to any minority segment that has multiple identities. And so usually one of the identities takes precedence over the other. So we find that, you may meet someone who identifies as LGBT and they say that, but they also have a disability. And that part is still sort of hidden, if you will. I don't think I can accurately speak to trends that are specific to the LGBT community in terms of disability and what makes that different, other than it's like a double whammy. Two identities that often seem to come with a lot of struggle and misunderstanding.
Yeah, absolutely, which is definitely going to affect their leadership style. We got a question here which kind of relates to one of our earlier questions, but talking more specifically about hiring practices around people with Asperger's or autism. So have you seen companies kind of take initiative in these areas or special considerations that they take into account? Liz, are you still on?
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. It's a great question. We do have a toolkit that's specifically geared to help companies start an autism hiring program. And our organization houses the Autism at Work Employer Roundtable. This is a group of companies that really have created an Autism at Work hiring program. It started with DXC, EY, SAP, Microsoft, Freddie Mac, and Ford. And it's grown since. I'm sorry, I missed JP Morgan Chase. So these companies have come together to learn from each other on how to do this and what works well. And again, there is a playbook that's available. One of the things that we've seen across all of the companies doing this is that the interview process screens out candidates with autism pretty easily. And so many of the companies that I named actually have a specific program for people with autism that it's a different interview process. And that's not been an easy thing to get through the company, right? And before I was here, I worked for Walgreens corporate on their disability inclusion initiatives and found the same thing. You know, even in the stores, the testing was screening out people with disabilities. And so we created a training program where you can come in, if you're a person with a disability, you can come in and learn how to do the job for 2 weeks. And if the store manager is satisfied that you know how to be, you know, a team member, you've passed that interview. So what could be a better way, right, than being on the job? I'm warning you, it's not easy to get this through a company. It's very difficult. But I will say that there are algorithms that are screening diverse candidates out. The interviewing process often does the same thing, and it's really difficult. Another different things about the Autism Roundtable that make it unique. You know, they looked at their interview processes. They also identified, most of them, identified specific job functions. One of the things that's been wonderful is a lot of these job functions are in corporate. Is one of the things that I like to say about my time at Walgreens. You know, great, people with disabilities can work in a Walgreens store, and for some that's a reach and that's amazing. But you know, the same way, when women started, we could be secretaries, and you know, we've certainly grown since then. Maybe not enough, but you know, where are people with disabilities in the C-suite now? Because the data remains the same. If you could be more educated or as educated as someone without a disability, but when you wheel into that interview room, you lost the job.
Right, yeah. We have another question here that I know a lot of people would be curious about who work specifically on HR and policies. And so that's, can you recommend a resource, or is one of the resources that you've already discussed talk about this, but that outlines how we can improve our benefits packages at companies?
Yes. So I think that there's a whole section on the Disability Equality Index just around benefits. And I'd be happy to kind of have a one-on-one conversation to understand more about what you're currently offering and talk about, you know, companies that are doing this well and then companies that are doing this kind of like exceptionally well. But I think it depends on the company, and I want to be sensitive to the time of other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we're a bit before time, but I actually wanted to potentially end a few minutes early, but first hand it over to Liz if you want to make any final comments or answer any final questions. And for those on the call who are also looking to receive HRCI or SHRM credits for today's call, we'll also be giving those out at the end. So no worries if you've had to drop early. You can also check the recording for that. But Liz, did you have any last questions you wanted to address or last things you wanted to mention?
No, just again, happy to answer further questions. You can reach me at liz@disabilityin.org. Again, really thank you, Ben, and thank you to the Out and Equal team for having us today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you. So we are going to end a few minutes early today, but I do want to say thank you again to Liz from Disability N and from Kirsten for speaking on today's call, and really to all of you attending and engaging in these conversations with us. Remember to join us next week for our summit kickoff call, and then later this month for our call on the intersection of LGBTQ and disability and inclusion. And please fill out the survey at the end of this call so we can continue kind of catering our webinar content moving forward. For those looking for SHRM HRCI credits, they're now shown on the screen, and I look forward to seeing you all next time on our next call.